Okay, so good evening and welcome to the rally tonight. A rally to celebrate workers' solidarity, workers' struggle, and ultimately a society that we're all fighting for, socialism. Hosted by the Socialist Party, this is part of the lineup of Socialism 23, a weekend of discussion and debate to fight for a world worth living in. And what a good time to have this rally. After many of us, along with hundreds of thousands of other people who attended the demo today, a demonstration for the Palestinian people. The Middle East at the moment really shows capitalism at its worst. War, destruction, and total disregard for human life and suffering. But it's not just internationally. Just walking down the street, opening your latest bill, or considering your terms and conditions at work all show why capitalism is broken. A system that allows the levels of stress at work that many workers face, that allows the energy price hikes that happen every winter, forcing working class people to choose whether to heat or eat, and that forces increasing amounts of people out of their homes to sleep in hostels or on the streets. This all shows a broken system. A system that can't afford the needs of the billions, but fills the coffers of the billionaires. So we need to say, if the system can't afford us, then we can't afford this system. And there is an answer. We can fight back. And the working class most certainly has been loud and proud and back in Britain. Posting in the union ballot boxes, standing on picket lines and taking to the streets, saying enough is enough, we want better, we need better, and we are determined through fighting to get better. Now, I haven't said who I am, and you might want to know, I don't know. My name's Sheila Caffrey, and I am a fighting activist elected to the National Executive in the National Education Union. The union who took 8 days strike action last year, taking over 100,000 members to the picket lines and onto the streets to fight for pay and funding that education and educated workers desperately needed and deserved. And I was proud of that action. It was members of the Socialist Party, along with a handful of other fighting activists that were raising for a year before that we needed to fight and finally move the executive to ballot members. And boy, did those members prove that they wanted to fight. We smashed the ballot and reballot. We recruited 70,000 new members who wanted to fight alongside us. And we showed that workers have power. We showed that you can move the government, who ended up doubling their original pay offer for teachers, as well as increasing funding by millions of pounds. We could have won more if the union had kept its nerve, but the leadership unfortunately weren't confident. Members were exhausted at the end of the year, and with promises to pause action before fighting again this year, the strikes were called off. So what action have we seen this year? Well, unfortunately, nothing from the NEU. But we've seen plenty from the government. First, there was RAC, discovered with school buildings literally crumbling around our ears. Then the government reneged on the funding that they promised for next September. And now we've had the autumn statement this week, announcing yet further cuts. It's on the NEU now. Will we fight, or will we give in and let the government entirely decimate education? We need to make it clear. If the current leadership isn't confident to fight, they need to step aside for those who will. And that's why we decided to run a fighting socialist for the national president of the NEU. It's myself. And I'm glad you agree, because that could have gone terribly wrong if you all went. I'm currently speaking at hustings meetings up and down the country, and we're certainly winning more than we're losing, showing again that the membership are wanting a leadership who will lead from the front and build from below. But much as my world sometimes feels that there is only the NEU in it, we have seen lots of fighting back and wins across the entire working class movement. And we have got some of the most determined and ardent class fighters here tonight. Now, not just those on the top table, although we're all excellent, but all of us in this room. We don't accept cuts and decimation of our public sector. We don't accept that half the planet is living in extreme poverty. And we don't accept the actions of the few with their thirst for profits above all else, leading climate change to the total eradication of this planet. We have shown the strength of solidarity and power of the workers through leading campaigns and taking to the picket lines. And so it is with great pleasure that I am standing up here with such amazing speakers. So I am going to pass over to our first one very soon. Civil service workers are at one of the sharpest ends of the government's austerity measures. And the latest figures in the autumn statement look like the government is angling to cut another 66,000 jobs. It's been through the actions of the PCS union that the cuts haven't completely destroyed the civil service, though. And so I'm really pleased that we have Marion Lloyd here tonight, a socialist who is standing for the General Secretary on a programme of action and fighting. And it is certainly resonating with the members. From aiming to get 70 branch nominations, she totally smashed it and got over 80. PCS members want answers, and they want a strategy to win, which Marion, along with other socialists, is able to provide. So, it is with great delight I hand over to Marion Lloyd. Thank you.
Well, comrades, I'm standing to become the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union, a civil service union that represents nearly 200,000 national government workers. I'm standing in order to build and to lead the fight against the government attacks against working people, including PCS members, on jobs, on pay, on pensions, and on services. We must be in no doubt that PCS is a big, powerful union that can have a lot of influence, and just imagine if we win. But I'm also the candidate that stands against war, that stands against occupations and imperialism. And PCS has a proud history of international solidarity. And if I am elected, I will not only continue those traditions, but I will build on those traditions. To help build and lead a mass anti-war movement up and down the UK and beyond. The role of the trade unions in the events that are happening international are absolutely crucial. The trade union movement should be at the heart of these demonstrations, linking up and arguing for international solidarity. And we're seeing a whole new young layer being radicalised by the anti-war movement that is developing across the UK and beyond. And the trade union movement have a critical role to play in that. And if I'm elected, I will explain to members the causes of war and the role that the trade union movement must play in opposing those wars. Developing workplace activism, opposing the occupation in Gaza, and linking together workers internationally to boycott the sending of arms to the Israeli state and stop the war machine. And I want to thank all the people in the Socialist Party and all the brilliant socialists up and down the country in my own union who are turning out to build support for that alternative and to help us win this election. And I think it's worth mentioning, as one socialist candidate to another, that Sheila, as well, as she's already said, is standing for the president of the NEU. And can you imagine the difference it would make if in 6 months' time we had the General Secretary of the PCS, the President of the NEU, And we mustn't forget, we've already got the General Secretary in NIPSA, the most important union in Northern Ireland, and the game changer that that would have for working people up and down the country. Not to mention a gaggle of women, of course, which has always got to be a good thing. Imagine the impact this would have. The most important period in this century, in my opinion. The strike wave, the brilliant struggles by workers up and down the country, the Amazon workers, the transport workers, the health workers, the list is endless. The international situation and what we've already set out in terms of Gaza and beyond. The Tories are in a mess. But we also have to recognise that Starmer's Labour is no alternative for ordinary working people struggling to put food on the table. And the possibilities of the intervention we can make if we hold these positions and use these positions and build in these positions for the ideas of socialism, not only the possibility of socialism, but the necessity for socialism. And everybody will know already about the special TUC Congress that the TUC has been forced to call, to agree and to build the response to the appalling anti-trade union laws and the minimum service levels stuff in particular. But imagine if we had the leaderships of the union where we could go out and build and argue for the mass alternative that is required, speaking at that Congress, saying what needs to be said, setting out what needs to be done. I remember back in 2011 when our comrades were in the leadership of PCS, a leadership that at that point I was proud to be part of, proposing at the podium of the TUC the response required to the attacks against our pensions, raising the question of a 24-hour general strike. And it was that intervention by our comrades that laid the basis for the 4 million workers out on the street on the 30th of November 2011. The sin being the absolute betrayal of the trade union leaders at that point. Rather than building the struggle, they demotivated and demobilised that mood. And I believe if we'd have built that, we would be in a completely different place to where we are now. It's simple for me. An injury for one is an injury to all. Whether it's my members on all-out strike at the moment in the ISS in Whitehall, striking for better pay and conditions, or whether it's the government taking on the trade union movement in their anti-trade union and draconian laws designed to keep us down. And the trade union movement must come together and fight. And we learn the lessons. Thatcher, who I can remember, was seen as invincible. But I believe that even then, if the trade union leaders and the trade unions had done their job properly, that we could have stood together and defeated her from introducing the first set of anti-trade union legislation. So let's understand what is possible now. We have the Tories, who are in an absolute and utter mess, divided, not knowing which way to turn. So clearly they can be defeated, but it is our job to utilise the latent power of the trade union movement and all of our working class communities more generally. But if we defeat the Tories on this, not only does it send a clear message to the current government, it also sends a clear message to Starmer and his idea of what a Labour government might look like. It will tell him that we are angry and we refuse to support his disgusting objections around calling for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. What an indictment of a Labour Party leader. It will send a message to him that we are not prepared to be cowed even when He's instructing and expelling his own sort in many ways and stopping them from standing side by side with us on the picket lines. What a reason to fight for and to build an alternative party based on the needs of ordinary working people. So by December the 16th, we should know the outcome of this election. And we have to understand that the role of the PCS leadership in 2011 is not the role that the PCS leadership plays now. That they have absolutely abjected their responsibilities, letting thousands and thousands of members down with their ridiculous situation, their capitulation in our recent pay and pensions dispute. But unlike them, I remain confident that despite what our leaders have done, that members remain prepared to fight. And with the right leadership, working alongside reps and members, we can organise collectively, build and defeat the anti-trade union laws. And just to wrap up, comrades, I've been a civil servant since 1978, when I joined at 16. I was a socialist before that, and I've never regretted it, and I've never wavered. If I win, I remain proud to stand and fight for the programme that we have put before our members, fighting for members and raising the ideas of socialism. Because let's be clear, like all workers, civil servants can see the dreadful state of society, horrified by the economic crisis, horrified by what they're seeing in the wars that we're currently experiencing. And quite frankly, comrades, if those workers are prepared to do battle on these questions, which I believe they are, they'll also be prepared to fight for a socialist society. Solidarity, comrades, that's the prize.
And definitely outlines why Marion is standing for General Secretary and what a phenomenal General Secretary she would make of the PCS. Now, unfortunately, our next speaker, who I was very much looking forward to hear, hasn't been able to make it as the train line from Coventry is down. Garfield has been part of the unionisation drive in Amazon to take on Jeff Bezos, a man who's more interested in joyrides in rockets than he is in ensuring pay and decent conditions for the workers. Garfield is extremely disappointed not to make it, but sends his best wishes to tonight's rally, and I'm sure that many of us will get to hear him again in the future. Now, it is no doubt that young people today are at the forefront of some of the horrors of capitalism, with 0-hour contracts, a minimum wage that pays you less if you're young, housing costs that are forcing young people not to be able to have their own home. But they're not giving up. We've seen in the demonstrations over the last few weeks, they're made up mainly of young people, confidently leading, chanting, offering solutions. So I'm really pleased to hand over to our next speaker from Coventry, Mila Hughes from Young Socialists Against War.
Thank you. We're a month and a half into the ongoing brutal Israeli state onslaught on Gaza and Palestinian people, and the world's capitalist leaders are showing yet again that our lives are not safe in their hands and their system. For most young people, we've witnessed an endless economic crisis in Britain for as long as we've been alive. People born even after the 2007-8 crash are now 16 on the streets protesting for the end of this conflict and their future. They have had enough. We have had enough. This is in a world already divided and destabilised by other international pressures facing major economic shocks. Capitalist politicians have no solutions to offer. Their system itself is rotten to the core and underlying causes of the wars that break out today. They are incapable of meeting the needs and aspirations of the working class anywhere in the world. Demonstrating today, while vital, is only the first step. Politicians representing the interests of the capitalist elite, whether Tory or New Labour, will never fight for the rights of Palestinians or working class Israelis any more than they'd fight for the interests of the working class and oppressed today here in Britain. Capitalism means war, just as much as it means the cost of living crisis, just as much as it means poverty, just as much as it means inequality and millions of deaths. We live in a country today where we've not voted for our political representatives for years, and it shows. The Tory members didn't vote for Sunak, and their outcomes and decisions are unsurprisingly left unchecked. And the Labour Party presents the same disconnect to the working class people, where they urge councillors, where they urge their representatives to not support strikes, to not support protests. And this just begs the question of how we can trust a Tory or Labour government to fight for us and to fight for Palestinian self-determination when they are already torn apart by so many of these issues presented today. The world and the system is more and more polarising every day to young people, and seeing this and other countless issues in front of them as their future. This war highlights the character of capitalism and the main divide within society which we all feel, them and us. On one side is the international movement of solidarity and opposition to the war from the working class and poor of the world. And today's protest in London is an illustration of that. On the other hand, the agents of the system continually prioritise power, prestige and profit over lives, and they continue to aim to prop up their system, even if it results into millions of deaths. And more of us are understanding that young people are talking about a whole system that is to blame and offers us with no future. With rising tuition fees, bills and food costs, us as the new generation are looking for political alternatives that represent the working class and not just the 1%. The new generation sees this, and it was only a few weeks ago that nearly 1 million people took to the streets of London, much like today, marching for an end to the war on Gaza. We've seen this and other governments actively trying to ban these mass demonstrations and arrest and alienating people, and see this as a solution which is wholly unsustainable. And now, thousands of school and college students are seeing the realities of who the Tories are and their support for these brutal attacks. With the understanding that the Labour Party will be no better for them, they are starting to fight back independently. That's why young socialists and the Socialist Party members are launching our call this weekend to further build school and college walkouts against Israeli state terror, and that includes actively engaging and discussing what we need to fight for, getting organised, building for these protests that we've seen to kick the Tories out and replace this rotten system of capitalism. Comrades, this is a system that cannot be fixed with the plaster of reforms. It will seek to further exploit, and this war on Gaza is a glimpse of that potential destruction. This is a system that requires revolutionary change, and we are the only organisation on the left that is serious in building these concrete and necessary demands required to fight for a future worth living, a future worth having, and one that the working class and young people deserve. That is a future which demands a necessary end to the cost of living crisis in Britain and to the war on Gaza. Workers and young people today need revolutionary change to the system to give back full control to the workers. And if you're interested in building that too, join the Socialist Party. Thank you.
Well, I think if Mila is representative of all those young people who are out there fighting today, then I think that the future is fairly safe in the direction it's going of socialism. So our next speaker was elected in 2017 as part of Corbyn's anti-austerity programme as an MP for the Kensington constituency. A constituency that unfortunately was made infamous by Grenfell, a horrific fire that cost many lives. It may have been 6 years ago, but it is still fresh in many people's minds as a horror that capitalism allows when cutting corners in the name of profits or considering aesthetics for rich neighbours is more important than the safety of people's lives. Emma has been a housing activist and campaigner who must be making good headway, as now has been barred from standing as a Labour MP. Proud badge of honour in many rooms around the country. So she was barred, even though she was backed by Unite the Union. But in the tenacious way all of our speakers have tonight, Emma has refused to let this stop her and will be standing against Starmer's Labour in the next election. Before I steal any more of Emma's applause, I'm just going to pass over to Emma Dent Coad.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Whole new audience. I didn't think I know some of you. I know some of you, but in Kensington we have quite a mixed audience. I have to say, most of them are more my generation. So it's lovely to talk to some younger people who've been out in the streets. The whole Palestine issue is huge in Kensington, not only in North Ken, where some wards have nearly 25% Muslims and their neighbours, of course, who care a lot about them, but also in other areas where there are perfectly decent people with pots of money who also think this is despicable. So good for them. And I do have to mix with everybody, of course. So I am the friendly face of socialism, people, okay? Remember, from the Socialist Republic of Kensington. I have a slightly different way of doing things, and I have to, because just under half my votes in 2017 and 2019 came from Tory wards, so I must be doing something right. I'm just a nice girl, and I just happen to have... I'm cuddly left. They say hard left. I don't like that. I say cuddly left. So some people call me Corbynista, and I object to that, not because I don't share his politics, but because I've had the same politics for half a century, I think. And it started at school. I went to a Catholic school, and it was Pax Christi, and we were all very involved in the peace movement there, and it was Vietnam and all sorts of stuff going on. This is in the olden days. I know some of you won't remember that. You can Google it. But so I like cuddly left. I like socialism, but I do try to be the friendly face of it. And actually, language is hugely important, and we know that. It's very, very important how we use the language. And we know that, especially looking at the press. I do listen to Radio 4. I really shouldn't. It makes me so angry. This whole debate about Gaza, and there are hostages, and some of them are hostages, and some of them are prisoners, and we've seen them being released today from one side and the other, and the hostages seem to have been relatively well looked after, and the prisoners, we've seen what a terrible time they've had. It's absolutely despicable how the mainstream media have been dehumanising one side and humanising the other side, and then we hear from the BBC that there are some journalists who have been hiding in the toilets crying and want to protest about it because they can't bear it. They just can't bear the language that they have to use. So we'll see. I don't know if that changes. And of course, you know, if you, the announcement today from the police that if you use certain words that could be misconstrued by one group or another, that you're going to be arrested. I mean, for heaven's sake, I just find it absolutely shocking, this stamping on our basic freedoms. And, you know, a lot of the right-wingers talk about, oh, we want freedom and so on, but they don't want us to use language that could be misconstrued by somebody. So I'm not happening to that. I've often been misunderstood, or certain lies have been attributed to me, and they're very, very good at it. They're so good at it. Some of the huge fibs that have been made up about me have become truth now. Now, on Wikipedia forever, however many times I say, I have police looking into one of them, and they say, absolute nonsense, there is no way you had anything to do with that, and it's still on freaking Wikipedia. So we have to be really careful, and we have to be better, and we have to raise our game on all of these issues. We have to get our messaging right. We have to counter disinformation much better than we do, and all the smears and lies, and we have to make proper rebuttals. And I think some people, they spend so much time rebutting and trying to prove that they did or didn't say something or other, and actually it makes no difference at all. Once the lie is said, it's stuck, and you can't get away from it. It's not about that, and we have to have new methods of rebutting that. And one of them, I would like to say, just make complete fun of them, because they do talk absolute rubbish. I had, in my interview, my due diligence interview, of which the chair was the blessed Luke Akehurst. Yeah, I know. He was so nice to me, I knew I was screwed. But he came up with all this stuff. It wasn't even true. I was accused of being at a march somewhere and doing something, and I wasn't there. It was the wrong year, and they had, you know, it was ridiculous. I was actually shielding at the time from COVID, and it just wasn't true. They are very, very good at that, and they go through all your social media and keep it, and then they fire bullets at you, as they call it, which is horrific. So, but apart from that, apart from controlling the narrative, we need to present our alternatives, our better alternatives, and our socialist alternatives in a better way, and a not scary way. And I am coming from Kensington, so forgive me if this sounds a bit moderate to you, but this is what I've had to live, and I've lived there forever, so I do know the score. And I take my principles and my values whole. I don't water anything down. Just the language I use is, I imagine, has been more palatable for some people. And I'm going to have to do that all over again as an independent. And I've had some very good feedback, actually. Not only from North Kent, where I expect it, but in South Kent, because the right-wing government is too right-wing for them, and they're certainly not going to vote for the liars in the Labour Party, which is interesting. So we'll see what happens. But more generally, I genuinely think we're at a moment of profound change. Peace movements working with unions is quite something, and I've been to some meetings where they're working together. And this mass movement of unions and peace, and we've seen on the street, this is huge. It is absolutely huge. And looking at this from a perspective, and I've been politically involved, as I said, for a very long time, looking at it from this perspective, it is massive what's going on now. It is really, really huge. So well done, all of you, for being around at this time and making sure this happens. The Tories are finished. They're completely finished. Their end game is to follow, Braverman and Cleverly into a far-right abyss, and David Cameron's going to save them? Come on! Oh my God, they are so done. They are really done. And then Labour is just chasing power by living in their shadow and shedding all their social policy as they go. And, I left the Labour Party in April because of that. And I would be leaving it every single day because of their position on Gaza if I hadn't left then. So, there's a gaping void in the middle. We've got the Tories over there with Labour in their shadow. And then there's this big void, and this is waiting for us to fill it. I don't think it will be the Liberal Democrats. So, even though, I've seen some very convincing bar charts, so you never know. The 9%ers, they're such brilliant fibbers, they really are. They did for me in 2019. It was the Lib Dems who did for me, and absolutely shocking, just a bunch of lies. So what can I say? Our fight is obviously against the press as well, against all social media. They do a brilliant, brilliant job of undermining, smearing, discrediting us and our policies, and turning perfectly reasonable, logical socialist objectives into the crazed ravings of anarchists and revolutionaries. And I've got nothing against anarchists and revolutionaries, some of them are very dear friends, but they will discredit them. They'll make them look like the enemy, and they're not. We have to really be better at that. We have to raise our game. And we also have to come up with new leaders. And I'm sure there's several, probably some on the stage here and some of you out there, because we really lack good leaders. We have the very obvious one who has, I hardly dare say his name because we're all going to be targeted, and I'm going to get lots of negative feedback on Twitter if I mention who. It's ridiculous. I don't photograph myself with him in case I get the hate. It's really shocking. It really is shocking. Even worse, if I go to an event with Sadiq Khan, honestly, the racist bile that he attracts is absolutely disgraceful. But we need a new generation of leaders, people who know what they're saying and understand the game and are better at putting this across. We need new Tony Benns and Antonia Benns, I imagine. So let's see where we go with that, because the people who are attracting the positive attention now are the people who present easy solutions which aren't true in upper caste drawls like Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and that lot, and it's very attractive, and we have to be very careful with this. I've got 1 minute now. So we will learn, please, how to bring our principles and values intact into the political arena, bring our values to the people, which is what I try to do, rather than say, oh, you've got to come over here into this scary place, this scary lefty place. No, it's fine. We're good people. We're going to make sure that the people you love are looked after so much better than they have been before. And I also, I pledged recently the Joe Cox Foundation Compassion in Politics Pledge, which is to be honest and not bitch about people in public anyway. And that's really hard in the snake pit of Parliament, but I will be doing that. So, brothers and sisters, the field is open, and it really is up to us to fill this gaping void out there. There are a lot of independents. As I've been sitting here, there's an independent group of councillors and others who are forming today because of the extraordinary success of our sister in Newham. Just incredible, absolutely amazing. So a lot of independents are coming together. So please support any socialist independents that you have in your areas, and support them to win. Come and help me if you're anywhere near Kensington. And in the next Parliament, we're going to get in there and we're going to really mess up Labour and scrutinise them properly, and they won't like it on their turf. Thank you.
Very much, Emma, and I wish you all the best in the election, and obviously we will be there fighting alongside any socialist candidates in the next election. Now, our next speaker has also been fighting for socialism for many years. I don't know whether he's counted as a friendly face of socialism. You can make your own mind up on that. But Tony Saunois is the secretary of the CWI. The CWI is the Committee for Workers International, which is a global organisation that brings socialists across the world together to build international solidarity and to create a fighting socialist leadership to transform society. Tony has just written a new book sharing the lessons of a popular unity government and the revolutionary opportunities in Chile during 1970s. And although this speech tonight will be broader than that, to hear more about Chile, you can join this session tomorrow, or you can attend the book launch with, I'm sure it will be a book signing as well. You can probably get photos with him that you won't be criticised for, as well, in tomorrow's lunch break. So I'm now very pleased to hand over to Tony.
Well, comrades, thanks for the introduction. whether it's a friendly face, I'll leave it for you to judge. But comrades, I think we've heard today from comrades involved in struggle of the tremendous battle that's been fought by the teachers in the last period, of the struggles that have been fought by the civil servants, of the youth. Those struggles that we've heard about thus far are really part of an international movement which has taken place, a revitalization of the class struggle in a whole series of countries. The class struggle is back on the agenda as far as the working class globally is concerned. The marvellous movement we've had in the recent period in the United States of the car workers illustrates that. It should strike into the hearts of the ruling class nothing but terror. For comrades, we are also in an era of global capitalist crisis, of horrific conflict and destitution which is taking place. The world in some areas today is being ravaged by wars and civil wars, particularly in Asia, Africa, and of course now in the Middle East as well. We're faced with two horrific global wars being fought out at the same time. 2 years ago, the Putin capitalist gangster regime of Russia, of course, intervened and invaded the Ukraine. They invaded that, of course, for the objective of establishing Putin's credentials. The Russian people were led by this gangster regime. They invaded the Ukrainian peoples, led by the Ukrainian oligarchs and backed by Western imperialism. And none of them had the interests of either the Ukrainian peoples or the Russian peoples at heart. And now what we saw in the course of that, the stench of hypocrisy from the leadership of Western capitalism and Western imperialism. They backed the Ukrainians. They thought they were stealing the moral high ground. And yet what have we seen in the course of the last month or so? The ground on which they stood has collapsed. The carnage which has been unleashed by the Netanyahu regime on the Palestinian peoples has mobilized millions around the world. But what has it exposed? That nothing but the hypocrisy of all of the leaders of the Western capitalists and the imperialist powers. We have seen in the course of this attack on Gaza apocalyptic scenes. That, of course, followed the murderous attacks by Hamas, which we, of course, from the CWI also opposed and condemned. But we, of course, as socialists and revolutionaries, cannot fail but to feel the pain of the Gazan people suffering at this particular point in time. Who could not have had tears brought to their eyes when they see the shots on the television of the children being slaughtered, of the hospitals being bombed? Who could not marvel at the heroism of the doctors and the medical workers who've remained at their posts? And now we see this alleged truce being agreed between Hamas and the Israeli regime. Some interregnum. Unfortunately, it is unlikely to resolve anything as far as the masses of the Gaza and the Palestinian peoples are concerned. It will not resolve their suffering and the bloodshed that they've already suffered and more, which unfortunately is probable to come. The exchange of prisoners. What a condemnation that we have. They're flagging up and boasting about the exchange of hostages and prisoners, and at the same time, the Israeli regime is arresting in the West Bank more people than they're actually releasing at this stage. What a condemnation of that particular regime. Comrades, the Jewish peoples throughout history have suffered horrific crimes, horrific repression, have been victims of the most horrific attacks and repression by fascism, particularly in Europe. But what do we have from the regime of Netanyahu? Within his coalition, they have fascistic elements. Faced with an overthrow only a few months ago, when hundreds of thousands took to the streets of the general strike in Israel taking place against that particular regime. But this regime, a regime of the Jewish peoples, which has suffered from fascism, has now resorted to the use of fascistic methods of ethnic cleansing and absolute brutality. We've seen in the West Bank the application of state apartheid in reality, of discrimination against the Arab peoples being carried through. And yet what do we hear? Western capitalist leaders, Biden, Sunak, Macron and the others, shedding a few crocodile tears, having asked the Netanyahu regime, don't go too far, and yet they've been apologists for that regime. You were the ones that armed the Netanyahu regime, that allowed and encouraged it to carry out this particular regime. You backed this Israeli regime to the hilt for a whole series of time. And as comrades have already said, what a condemnation of a Labour leadership that won't even call for a ceasefire. Starmer is the embodiment of betrayal, even before he's come to power, as far as the attacks on Gaza are horror without end for the peoples there. But let us not forget, this is the methods that have been used by capitalism and capitalist regimes throughout war. Let us remember what happened when they dropped the nuclear bombs, or the atomic bombs rather, on the Japanese people. They'd already obliterated 60 cities, and Japan at that stage was defeated. The same applies to what the British did against the German population of Dresden. We hold capitalism and its leaders as responsible for inflicting slaughter, pain and suffering. We prosecute them in the global court of the world's working class, and we find them guilty of the sufferings of humanity that it faces today. But we have to But as comrades have said, in relation to the Gaza, in relation to the struggle of the Palestinian peoples, to the wars that we face, there is no solution on the basis of the continuation of capitalism. Capitalism means exploitation and it means war. There will be no solution for the Palestinian peoples involving Western imperialism. There will be no solution for the Palestinian peoples or the Jewish peoples involving Netanyahu and the Israeli ruling class. There will be no solution for the peoples of the Arab world on the basis of the continued rule of the Arab elites, and neither for the Palestinian peoples led by organisations such as Hamas. We need, comrades, to raise the flag of the need for a socialist solution and a socialist way out of this horrific conflict. Capitalism will offer nothing but misery and continued destitution for the mass of the population. We need a mass movement to be built of the Palestinian peoples themselves, of the Israeli population themselves, of the socialist intifada within Palestine, linking up with the whole of the Arab peoples throughout the region, that can extend a hand and reach out and appeal for unity to the working class of Israel as well, to find a socialist solution, a solution based on the Socialist Confederation of the Middle East, that would guarantee all of the rights of the peoples, of the Palestinian peoples, of the Arab peoples and the Israeli population, and for the peoples themselves, not these corrupt gangster rulers, for the peoples themselves to come together to democratically decide the state form that will be possible and defending the legitimate national and democratic rights of all peoples. And only a socialist road will offer a way out of this carnage today. But comrades, today we are facing the horrors of two major conflicts. We are also facing, comrades, another war. There is an economic war taking place globally, with bombs raining down on the working class and the poor on this planet in a manner that has not been experienced for generations. The rich have accumulated increasing wealth and power at an unprecedented degree. The wealthiest, the 1%, in the last 2 years, they've accumulated twice as much wealth as in the whole of the rest of the world just in the last 2 years. The billionaires, imagine this, in one single day, the global billionaires, they accumulate 27 billion extra US dollars every single day that they put into their pockets. 1 in 10 of the world's population at the same time go hungry. What a condemnation of a society in 2023 that situation exists globally, that situation exists of a worsening situation for the younger generation, where for the first time, even in the advanced capitalist countries and the imperialist powers, today's younger generation only can look forward to a situation far worse than what my generation and previous generations have experienced in the past. We've had, comrades, the application of neoliberalism. 50 years ago, we had the coup in Chile that took place. That ushered in the beginning of the neoliberal experiment, where the Chicago boys allowed a free hand to carry out their murderous policies through the application of privatization, precarious working, destruction of labour rights, etc. That was then extended a few years later to the global policy of capitalism itself. And what has it been? In reality, what we've seen in the course of the last decades is a wealth pump which is extracted from the poor and given to the rich. That's what capitalism has meant in the course of the past period. And economically, we're facing, therefore, a disastrous situation as far as the working peoples of the world are concerned. And what a system! They now shed crocodile tears once again and wring their hands in despair at the environmental catastrophe which is taking place. And it is a catastrophe which is affecting millions of people around the planet at this point in time. And yet, who's responsible? Look at the capitalist class and the ruling elite as well. The 1%, this famous 1%, they have more carbon emissions than 66% of the rest of the population. They're responsible for what is taking place as far as the climate devastation which is affecting now every continent. So therefore, comrades, we have two wars, the military wars and the social and economic wars which capitalism are throwing on the backs of the poor and the working people of the world. And yet, comrades, what have we seen? The official left, they've gone absent without leave. None of them speak of socialism. They've abandoned the struggle of the class struggle. They've embroiled themselves as defenders of capitalism. They think the so-called reformers and the new left paint a picture that with a little bit of tinkering here, a little bit of adjustment there, as far as the market economy is concerned, and everything could be sorted out. Well, no, comrades. What we're facing today is a system in a prolonged death agony. It doesn't need tinkering. It doesn't need adjustment. It needs overthrowing and replacing with something There is a collapse in the confidence of all of the major traditional parties. The institutions of capitalism in country after country have less and less credibility and authority. The corruption, the nepotism, everything which is riddled within this system is becoming more and more evident, particularly to the younger generation who are now beginning to rise in revolt against it. And yet the vacuum which exists politically, it is resulting in an extremely dangerous situation. There is a cry of despair which is reflected in those disastrous election results in Argentina, of the threat of Trump returning, of what has taken place in the Netherlands, the rioting in Dublin the other night. All of it is a cry of despair as far as sections of the most exploited and downtrodden of society is concerned. And the need for a new party of the working class in all countries, which will challenge this system and offer a new way forward, has never been greater and more necessary than what it is today. We need leaders of the trade union movement who are prepared to fight, like Marion, who's standing for the election of the PCS. We need leaders of the unions that are not going to be compromisers and shirkers, are going to be prepared to stand out and fight determinedly to defend the interests of their members. And therefore, comrades, the need for a building of a mass socialist alternative is more urgent than ever because of the devastating crisis which global capitalism has now thrust the whole of humanity into at this stage. If we look at the world through the prism of the TV screens and the newspapers, the horrors, the wars, it'll be very easy to draw pessimistic conclusions. There was, I think, an apt conversation, a little work written by Leon Trotsky some years ago, at the turn of the 19th century, as the hopes were pinned on what the new 20th century would mean. And as the 20th century opened, the pessimist put to the optimist, this is what your new 20th century means. Ethnic cleansing, national conflict, racism and war. The optimist replies, no, you are merely the present, we are the future. And the future is optimistic on the basis of building a real socialist alternative that can offer a way out as far as the working class of the world is concerned. Socialism, the need for it is rotten ripe, and the capacity for humanity to build a new socialist world has never been greater. The marvellous scientific developments, AI, in the hands of the working people could be used to really transform the lives of the entire planet. It could take it to a level which even at the time of the Russian Revolution was unimaginable for what the lives and conditions of working people could be. And therefore, comrades, it is necessary to build a movement and a party which offers such an alternative, nationally and indeed internationally. But let us remember, comrades, one thing as well. The ruling class, and no ruling class in history, has ever abandoned the scene and walked away without a struggle. And that means a struggle with no holds barred. We should remember the words of Che Guevara as far as the tasks of revolutionaries are concerned. And he made an important point. The task of socialists and revolutionaries is not to sit in the doorway and wait for the corpse of imperialism to pass by, because it will simply not die and go away. They will fight to continue their rule, their exploitation, their domination of the planet until they are challenged and ultimately overthrown. Therefore, comrades, we appeal to all those present. Join us in the struggle to build a new alternative. Face the future with optimism on the basis of struggling for a new world order of socialism. That is the way forward, comrades, in the course of the next period. Let us remember the words of Rosa Luxemburg as she answered the capitalists. Tomorrow the revolution will rise up again, clashing its weapons, and to your horror it will proclaim, I was, I am, and I shall be. And revolution and socialism will be the future of humanity if we build such a party, such an international, which is capable of achieving it.
Now, our final speaker tonight does not need a lot of introduction. Hannah Sell, the General Secretary of the Socialist Party, is tonight's keynote speaker. The Socialist Party isn't just fighting for reforms under capitalism, but fights to smash the system that oppresses the working class. We are fighting for a socialist world, a world where poverty, war, and inequality is entirely eradicated, and the development of society is run by the working class for the working class. Again, a tenacious fighter for many years, Hannah not only has the belief that a socialist world is possible, but also has the strategies and tactics needed to get there. So our next and final speaker tonight, Hannah Sell.
Well, comrades, we've heard tonight about all of the horrors of capitalism. This world of barbaric slaughter and growing climate catastrophe. And we've also heard about the alternative, about socialism, a society run democratically in the interests of all rather than for the profits of a few. But the main question I want to address is our role, how we take the struggle for socialism forward internationally, but also particularly here in Britain. Over the last 18 months, we have seen, or to be more accurate, we have begun to see the potential power of our class, the working class majority in this society. We saw it in the strike wave, the biggest strike wave in over 3 decades. And we have also seen it in the last few weeks in the power of our movement against the onslaught in Gaza. And we shouldn't underestimate that. After all, it was obvious to us all, wasn't it? Until 2 days before the massive 11th of November demonstration, Sunak wanted to ban it. That's what he was going on TV to say, but he was forced into a U-turn. And 2 days later, after our massive demonstration, Cruella Braverman was out on her ear. That was a victory for our anti-war movement. And we marched again today, because while we welcome even the slightest let-up in this slaughter, it is not enough. A ceasefire, which we don't have in any real sense at this stage, is not enough. We stand for the national liberation of the Palestinian people. And as Tony said, the struggle for that is part of the struggle for socialism. Because all of the capitalist elites, US imperialism and its mini-me here in Britain, for them, the rights of the Palestinians are worth no more than very occasional lip service. Nor do the Arab elites care. Nonetheless, we've also seen something of the potential power of our movement in the worldwide movement against the war on Gaza. Because in response to that unimaginable horror, millions of people in every continent have taken to the streets. Above all, people have taken to the streets in the Arab world. And let's be clear, that's why, while Biden continues to back the Israeli state to the hilt, he is nonetheless piling the pressure on to try and hold the Israeli state back. They fear a regional war, but above all, they fear another Arab Spring. For the younger comrades in the room, that was back in 2011, when dictatorships were overthrown by revolutionary movements of the masses in Arab and North African countries. Those potential victories were not consolidated. The old order rolled back. Sisi, the current Egyptian president, was the head of military intelligence under the old regime. By the way, he was trained in the US and in Britain. Ultimately, those revolutions were defeated because the working class did not have their own parties. They did not have parties with a programme for the socialist transformation of society. But the capitalists, the elites, they're not complacent. They're terrified that they might not be so lucky next time. The Socialist Party is part of the Committee for Workers International. You've heard from Tony tonight. And we are working across the world to build parties to make sure that the worst fears of the capitalist elites are realised next time round. I would just add, it's not only international pressure that is bearing down on Netanyahu. It is also growing pressure from the Israeli population. This stage, obviously, particularly on the question of the hostages. One of the issues that is posed very sharply for this movement, which is discussed on all of the demonstrations, is how can the military might of the Israeli state be defeated, backed by US imperialism, still the most powerful military machine on the planet? Let's be clear, the Israeli military is powerful, but no amount of slaughter will prevent the Palestinian people's desire for national liberation. But it is also possible to see how it could be defeated. Because look at the enormous divisions in Israeli society. It is not one cohesive whole. Even during the war, This right-wing government in Israel remains extremely unpopular. And let's remember, it was shaken by a huge mass movement lasting 9 months, including a general strike against it in the period before the war broke out. So that gives a glimpse of what is possible. In the Socialist Party, we are optimists, but we're also realistic. We can see that there is no solution to the hell being faced by the Palestinians on the basis of capitalism. But we can also see that capitalism could be overthrown. Imagine if we had democratically elected workers' governments in the Middle East that had taken the corporations and banks into public ownership to meet the needs of all. We are absolutely confident that on that basis it will be possible for the workers of both Palestine and Israel to be able to negotiate on every issue, on borders, on water supply, in order to be able to live together in peace as part of a socialist Middle East. So that comes to our tasks here and now. We have to keep building the anti-war movement. We've heard from Mila tonight. We've already seen school and college students walking out on strike across the country. And young socialists in the Socialist Party will be building for more of those walkouts before the end of term. The Socialist Party is also fighting for the trade unions, as Marion said, to play the leading role in this movement. For the unions to back to the hilt any workers who refuse to send equipment that is used to rain death on the peoples of Gaza. We also have to step up the demonstrations and the lobbies of Labour MPs. Just over a quarter of them managed to find the guts to vote for a ceasefire, just a ceasefire. Let's be clear, some of them did that out of conviction, but many of them did it because they felt the hot breath of the movement. They feared their electorates in their constituencies, and that's why they voted the way that they did. But above all, our job in the Socialist Party is to build support for a socialist programme, to build the Socialist Party, to convince those that we can reach that it is also possible here in Britain for the working class majority to take power and to begin to build a new democratic socialist society. It's desperately needed. We all know this. We're in the midst of the biggest fall in real living standards since the 1950s. There are 13 million people now in Britain who don't get enough to eat on a daily basis. And yet, even according to the government, the energy companies made 170 billion in excess profits, whatever excess profits are, in the course of the last 2 years. And what are we going to do about it? Put our hopes in Keir Starmer? Is that the answer? I think comrades in this room know what we think about that. We're all going to be glad to see the back of the Tories. And Starmer does look to be on his way to Downing Street. Hunt's supposed pre-election bribe is a tax cut that cancels less than a quarter of the tax rises over the last 2 years. That's not going to save this Tory government. To win, they would need a bigger swing than any Tory government since the Second World War. And nobody, least of all the Tories themselves, thinks that is what is on the cards. But Starmer, the man who's going to replace Sunak, this is the man who explains his opposition to a ceasefire, to a halt in the slaughter of children, as necessary because he wants to be the next government, and so needs to align with our international allies. This is the man who ordered his MPs and councillors not to protest for Palestine and ordered them not to go on picket lines. It tells you all you need to know about how this Labour government will behave in power. New Labour Mark 1 under Blair acted as a US sidekick and took part in the invasion of Iraq. Yeah, peddled all the lies about weapons and mass destruction. is certain that over 500,000 people died as a result of that war. And Starmer is telling us he will be no different when he is in power. And it's not only a question of foreign policy. Every pledge that Labour made to improve the lives of working class people in the Corbyn and Dent Coad period, it's all been ditched. Mass council house building, abolishing tuition fees, nationalising mail, energy, the Green New Deal, the lot. It's gone along with Corbyn, kicked out. And instead we have ironclad fiscal responsibility, or as it's otherwise known, doing the bidding of the capitalist class and the international finance markets. And let's be clear, that bidding will be more brutal than it was under New Labour Mark I. Back in 1997, the economy was growing. National debt was 40% of GDP. Now it's 100% and the economy is flatlining. Starmer will be a capitalist politician presiding over a capitalist system in deep crisis. At best, a continuation of what we have now, and possibly a new global recession. It was the Great Recession in 2008 that sounded the death knell for New Labour Mark I. And none of the problems that caused it have been overcome. It was triggered by bursting bubbles in the world financial system, and the solution of the capitalists globally was to reinflate them, to pump vast sums into the finance markets via quantitative easing and ultra-low interest rates. Profits were restored, but capitalism remained a system in intensive care, drugged up on vast amounts of debt. That was added to in the pandemic, so that today global total debts are a vast 3.5 times global total production. And of course, this is at a time when cheap debts and ultra-low interest rates have come to an end. We all know that. It's straining the pockets of every worker with a mortgage, a credit card, or an overdraft. But it is also intensifying the next crisis of global capitalism. This is a system in intensive care, but British capitalism is on life support. The historical justification, if you like, for the capitalist system was that it drove investment in improving the productivity of human labour. In Britain, productivity growth is at its lowest in 250 years. It has grown in total by just 1.7% since 2008, compared to 27% in the 16 years before that. So Starmer is going to become to power with a system that he defends in crisis, with an NHS on its knees, with the highest waiting lists ever recorded, 26 councils or more facing bankruptcy, and a working class that is suffering the worst fall in real wages since the Second World War. Back in ancient history, when the Tories first took over from New Labour, they spent a few years making use of a joke by an outgoing New Labour minister. Tells you everything you need to know, by the way, about the class character of New Labour, that they would leave nice, funny little jokes for the next incoming Tory government. Anyway, this Labour minister left a note for his successor saying, sorry, there is no money. If Hunt was to do the same to Rachel Reeves today, there would be more than a grain of truth. Even his tax cuts have been funded by future austerity. Of course, that's only on a capitalist basis. There is money, there's shed loads of money. In the midst of our misery, the top 100 companies in Britain last year paid 79 billion in dividends to their shareholders. But we know Starmer's Labour is not going to be taking money from them. It's going to be demanding that we cough up to pay for the crisis in their system, with only the most minor concessions given to try and show that Labour is different. Actually, most of big business would prefer a Labour government now in Britain. And the reason is because they think Starmer will have more authority to inflict misery on us than the current Tory lot do. You want a taster of how Labour is going to behave in office. Look at the behaviour of Labour councils. Coventry Council, after that bin strike for 6 months, where they spent millions trying to break the strike, they are now threatening to use fire and rehire in order to deal with the just demands of the refuse workers. We have to be prepared for what is coming. And we have to warn, to organise our movement. Because we know some of the union leaders, perhaps a majority of them, are going to try and argue, look, we can't take action against this government because it's ours, it's a Labour government. And temporarily, we laugh. But there can be a feeling, well, we've got to give them a chance. At least they've got to be better than the last lot. But that mood will be shallow. And it will not prevent struggle for long when Starmer doesn't deliver. The Tories are currently in terminal decline. Emma talked about this. This was once the strongest capitalist party on the planet. It's still a party of government. Yet their conference this year had less people at it than we've got in this hall tonight, and they were a lot older. The reason for the weak social base of the Tories is because they defend the capitalist system and it's in crisis. Labour will face the same fate. And even now, it's true, millions of people will vote Labour at the general election because they're desperate to get the Tories out. But it's not going to be done with enthusiasm. Actually, there's only twice since 2001 that Labour has got more than 10 million votes. In 2017 and 2019. Why? Because the programme of Labour under Corbyn gave people a positive reason to vote. But that has gone. The last two heralded by-election victories for Labour, their vote flatlined compared to the supposedly terrible result of 2019, but they won because the Tory vote collapsed. That's how Labour is going to win the general election, but that will not result in a population willing to trust Starmer to deliver. It won't even guarantee him a majority, he'll probably get one. And we know working class and young people have learnt the value of fighting back in the last few years. Whether socialists were there or not, under the next government, we will see new anti-war movements, new BLM movements, mass struggles for serious action on climate change. And we will also see strikes on a bigger scale than we have yet seen. And let's remember, we went through a long period when strikes were a rarity. They were at the lowest level since records began. No more. The first strike wave may have passed its peak, but a new generation has risen from their knees, have found out if you want to win a better pay deal or stop attacks on your terms and conditions, you have to be prepared to go on strike. That includes previously unorganised workers in vicious anti-union workplaces like Amazon. And in general, the strikes are of a different character to what came before. Previously, we had generally one-day token strikes. Now, they're more determined, with workers jumping over the obstacles of the anti-union laws, not once, but again and again and again, in order to continue their struggles. And unlike the last big strike wave back in 2011, this time, not everyone has been on strike, but significant numbers of workers have drawn the conclusion you've got to build the movement between the strikes. You've got to be prepared to become a workplace rep, to build your union branch, to get organised. And that means we could see a further mass waves of strikes before the general election. That will be particularly the case if they try and use the new minimum service legislation. Then the whole of the movement will need to come to the aid of the workers under attack. Under pressure, the TUC have called what they describe as a once-in-a-generation conference. But we have to say that has to be prepared to call once-in-a-generation action, or to be more accurate, first-in-a-generation, because it won't be the last time. Unite passed a motion at its conference this year, initiated by Socialist Party members, calling for a 24-hour general strike if it was needed to defend workers attacked by this legislation. That's what is required. And if a leave was given, collective defiance of this law by the working class would absolutely be on the agenda. Especially, actually, because the one crumb that Starmer is offering the trade unions to try and get their votes is that this legislation will be repealed, which means it's rightly seen as a very temporary law, so why the hell not defy it? That is not to suggest that we can trust Starmer even on this issue. After all, Blair did not repeal any of the anti-trade union laws that were already on the statute books then, and we don't just want this latest legislation gone, we want the lot kicked out. There is no obligation on any employer to use this legislation. It only says that employers may use the legislation. The SNP have managed to say that they will not use the legislation. Why hasn't a single Labour authority or mayor come out and said that they will not use the legislation, show the trade unions the colour of their money? Why hasn't Labour nationally said that they will reimburse any trade union that is fined under the legislation the minute they walk into Downing Street? So the Socialist Party has a vital role to play in helping to build democratic fighting trade unions locally and, as we've heard tonight, also at national level. That's needed now, and it will be needed even more to defend our class under the next government. But our class also needs a political voice. It was very important to hear from Emma tonight because she is leading the way, not allowing the slander to stop her, but standing in the election, putting a positive programme. And that is what's needed. We hope that Jeremy Corbyn and others will do the same. The Socialist Party is fighting to try and make sure that the workers' movement has a block of MPs in the next Parliament that could give voice to the movement on the streets. Even a small number of MPs would strengthen our class and put the pressure on the Starmer government. I mean, look at the ceasefire vote. The SNP is absolutely not a party of the working class. I'm not suggesting that. But for their own reasons, they moved a vote on the ceasefire. And that put the Labour MPs on the spot. They wouldn't have been put on the spot otherwise over it. We need workers MPs who do that on every single issue, domestically and internationally. And so that's why we're fighting to build the strongest possible stand in the general election. The Socialist Party is co-hosting a convention in February next year to bring together all of those who want a working class challenge at the next election. Of course, we know even the best we manage will be small compared to what is needed. But it is vital preparation for what is ahead. Because unfortunately, no matter what crimes the Starmer government commits, we will still have to have an argument on these issues. There will still be those in the trade union movement who say, look, we've just got to keep backing Labour. We know they're a bit crap, but otherwise we'll get something worse. Otherwise we'll get Suella Braverman or her ilk. And it's true. The racists, the right populists, inside and outside the Tory party, they will make gains on the basis of the unpopularity of Labour in office. But you don't cut across racism by backing a Labour government that is attacking the working class. You have to build something new that is internationalist and stands for workers' unity and against racism. Others will say, forget politics, it's too difficult. Let's just rely on our own strength via strikes to defend our class. But the problem with that is strikes can inflict a lot of defeats on the bosses, but they leave the bosses running the show. And we need more than that. Unite at the moment, for example, are running a very good campaign for the nationalisation of energy. I mean, they propose paying the bosses 90 billion quid for it, which is a lot less than the bosses would demand, but in our view, they shouldn't be paid a penny. It should be compensation only on the basis of need. But nonetheless, it's a good campaign. going to do it. Achieving that requires the working class having a political voice, fighting for a mass workers' party, for a workers' government. And such a government should not stop at just nationalising energy. I mean, how about the steel industry? How much clearer could it get that as long as the bosses are in charge, it will always be the workers who pay for a green transition? It should be taken out of the bosses' hands and nationalised. All of the giant corporations and banks that dominate our economy should be brought into democratic public ownership so we can begin to build a socialist planned economy. Harness the huge resources created by capitalism to meet the needs of all and to carry out a real socialist green transition, so that new technology, instead of meaning job losses, could be used to share out the work, so we could actually have some leisure time, and some leisure time in which we could afford to heat our houses, maybe go out and enjoy ourselves, you never know. That's what we're fighting for. And we've said before, in the Socialist Party, we are optimists. The famous leader of the Russian Revolution, Tony's already mentioned him, Leon Trotsky, in whose footsteps we tread, he was also an optimist. And when he was ill in the year of his death, when the Stalinist agents who murdered him were chasing him down, he expressed his complete confidence in the ability of the working class to change the world. I won't quote it all, but I'll quote a little bit. He said, "For 43 years of my conscious life, I have remained a revolutionist. For 42 of them, I have fought under the banner of Marxism. If I had to begin all over again, I would, of course, try to avoid this or that mistake. But the main course of my life would remain unchanged. My faith in the communist future of mankind is not less ardent, indeed it is firmer today than it was in the days of my youth." And he went on, "Life is beautiful. Let the future generations cleanse it of all evil, oppression and violence and enjoy it to the full." Since then, we have had 83 more years of capitalist misery. We've seen the collapse of Stalinism, which was not genuine socialism. They were dictatorial regimes without a whiff of the workers' democracy that Trotsky fought for. But nonetheless, they were based on a very distorted form of a planned economy, and they represented a counterweight to capitalism. And when they collapsed, the capitalists were triumphant. They declared, "We've won. Our system's fantastic. We're going to dominate the globe forever." But that was now many decades gone. And the capitalists are in despair because their system doesn't work. Because 2/3 of young people in Britain today consider themselves socialists. Not because they know everything about what socialism means, but because they know this capitalist system doesn't work. The working class has at least begun to fight back and to show its potential collective power against the misery that capitalism offers them. We can't wait for capitalism to collapse, because it won't. But the future generations that Trotsky spoke of, this generation, the young comrades in the hall tonight, we are going to have opportunities to bring the nightmare of capitalism to an end. To, as Trotsky predicted, cleanse the planet of evil, oppression and violence. Bring to an end war and environmental destruction and build a future worthy of humanity. If you agree, then join the Socialist Party and join us in the struggle for a socialist future.
Arrived here tonight not convinced with the ideas of fighting for a socialist future, I think Hannah would have definitely changed their minds. And I'd like to thank all our speakers tonight. Their words and actions are all inspirational and definitely show a wide range of class fighters who are leading the way to change the world. But I'd also like to thank the organisers and helpers who have done a great job running things so smoothly for this entire weekend. There are far too many to name, but this year's organisation was definitely made more difficult with the last-minute change of plans to ensure that we could join the demo. but nevertheless, it has already been shown to be a successful event and will continue to be so tomorrow with many interesting sessions. So if you haven't already thought to join us, please pick up a programme and register at the desk outside. There's also a bar outside. You might have noticed it. Now, we don't want anything left, so please feel free to drink the bar dry. But there's also the opportunity to discuss with members of the Socialist Party. So if you're not a member but have been inspired by what you've heard tonight, we want you. We want those active class fighters to join us. So please find that table outside and find out more. Now, if you are staying in the hostel tonight and don't yet have your key, as soon as you finish, please go to Lenny at the table outside to collect it, because he wants to drink the bar dry as well. And there is even a table there to pay your pledge from the Fighting Fund appeal. Now, don't feel shy if you now want to increase it. That is the kind of surprise that we like. So, to finish tonight, I'd like everyone to stand up and join us in singing the song of the international working class, the Internationale. And so as not to ruin all your ears, this won't be led by me, but by Rob Williams.
Arise.